Today on Alistair Art, we're going to be looking at the artwork of MC Escher. In particular, we're going to be looking at his tessellations. MC Escher, also known as Martus Cornelius Escher, was born back on June 17th, 1898, in Leeuwarden, Netherlands, which is just slightly northeast of Amsterdam. Escher is a graphic artist who is really well known for his artwork that uses math to either create things like impossible objects or things like tessellations. As a child, Escher was often very sick and struggled at school. When he was in his 20s, he ended up going to the Haarlem School of Architecture and Decorative Arts, where he did learn about drawing techniques and making woodcuts. Woodcuts is one of the things he's more famous for doing, along with things like lithography. But with a woodcut, what happens is you take a block of wood and you carve away little bits of the wood. And once you carve them away, you put down ink and then you use the block to actually print a picture, which is what I think makes some of his art really amazing. In 1922, MC Escher went on a trip throughout Europe, and he became very inspired by the different geometric designs and interlocking patterns and repeating patterns that were on the walls, floors, and ceilings of some of the buildings, especially like the palace in Alhambra, which is in southern Spain. He ended up using this to really inspire him to make a lot of his own tessellations. Escher ended up moving to Rome, Italy in 1923, where he met his future wife, Yetta. While there, the couple stayed all the way until 1935. Eventually, they ended up leaving because of the rule of Mussolini, and it just became too unacceptable for Escher, who really didn't care for politics, but it became so bad that he ended up moving to Switzerland. When Escher and his family got to Switzerland, he was never very fond of the place. They stayed there for about 2 years, and in 1937, they left and moved to Belgium. He lived in Belgium for a few years, but in 1941, they were forced to move back to the Netherlands because World War II was in full swing. That is where he ended up living out the rest of his life. The last work that he ever made was this really intricate wood block, and the way that this one was made was, again, carving things out, but you have to carve out different blocks for each of the colors and have everything fit together just perfectly. This work was made in 1969, and he ended up dying 3 years later. His wife also died in 1969. The couple did have 3 children. Throughout MC Escher's life, he made many different types of mathematical inspired artworks, things like impossible shapes and reflections and things that would explore infinity. We're going to be focusing mostly on his tessellations of the different interlocking designs. A tessellation is when you have a surface that is completely covered with some sort of pattern of flat shapes with no overlapping gaps. So everything has to fit together perfectly. Kind of like this one with the 2 birds, where the white birds are flying to the right and the blue birds are flying to the left, and there's no little gaps in between. Now, the one that we have here on the right with development is a different kind of tessellation where the shapes do change, but they continue to interlock all the way out, which is very, very complex. There are 3 main types of tessellations. There's translation, which is what we're going to be doing today. There's reflection, and there's rotation. Now, there are some different tools we're going to need for today. The main things we're going to need today are paper, pencil, and we're going to need a small piece of paper. Mine is 3 inches by 3 inches, a little square, and that is what we are going to make our template to make our tessellation out of. You are going to also need scissors and a little bit of tape for this. I'm using some basic clear tape. You can use really any kind of tape. You just need 2 little pieces. At the end, you will need to add some color. So you can use anything like usual. You can use crayons, colored pencils, which are the 2 things I'm going to end up using. You can also use things like markers. You can use things like pastels, oil pastels. You can use things like Sharpies. You can do watercolor paints or other paints. Watercolor paints, be careful so they don't bleed. Tempera paints, acrylic paints, a little bit easier, but you will be using quite a bit of them. And now I'm going to show you how to take those tools and to actually make your own template so that we can make a tessellation. So again, today we are making a tessellation. The kind of tessellation we're going to be making is called translation. The way that's going to work is we're going to be using our pencil to draw out shapes on 2 of the sides. We're going to be cutting them out and sliding them over and taping them in place. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to go up to the top, and I want to make sure to stay within these corners. I don't want to cut from the side it's just going to make life a lot more difficult. So I'm going to start inside a little bit, draw any kind of shape we want. You can make it very deep, you can make it shallow, it's up to you. And what I'm going to do is once I have this shape and it's within these corners, I'm then going to cut out that shape very carefully. So try to take your time, cut on your line the best you can. The line doesn't really matter a lot right now because we are just making our shape. If you plan ahead, you can kind of decide what it is you want to make ahead of time. That's never how I've made tessellations. I always make the shapes and then try to come up with a creative idea to turn my shape into. So now I cut my shape out. I'm going to put my shape that I cut out right back in so you can see right where it goes. And the way a translation works is we are going to slide this shape down without flipping it over. It's really important we don't do that because that will kind of mess up the kind of tessellation we're making. Once I slide it down, try to make sure that it's right in place. If we have extra room on one side, you can see there's a little bit of an area before I got to the corner, whereas this side I started at the corner. So I want this to line up as best I can at the corner, kind of like this. Once I have it in place, get a small piece of tape, and we're just going to tape that in place, kind of like so. And I'm going to do the same thing with one of the sides. So I'm going to try to start way up here in the corner, and I'm just going to make some kind of other shape. Once I do my shape, again, I'm just going to cut our shape out. If you start in the corner and end at the other corner, it makes it a little bit easier when you go to tape it in place because you don't have to do much with the aligning. If you start inside of the corners, you have to try to make sure you get it exactly lined up with the other side so that it fits perfect together like a puzzle piece when we start doing our drawing here in a few minutes. So again, get my shape, cut it out, try to get as close to that corner as I can. Get my shape, make sure it fits in there. Like this would be bad if I slid it over because it would not fit because my shape actually goes this way. So make sure that it fits in there. Once you do, you gotta pick up your shape if we can. And I'm gonna take my shape and slide it across. Try to get it lined up as best we can. And again, tape it in place. This is how we make our template that we're going to use for our tessellation. Now that we have our template made, what we're going to do is we are going to start tracing our template. So I'm just going to take my template. You can kind of decide where you want to start. Usually I'll start up in a corner. So maybe I want it to sit like this, right where it kind of touches the edges. And I'm going to take my time. We're going to hold this down. And I'm going to slowly trace around the outside of my shape. This is probably the part that takes the most precision, or I would say the most time, but once you start drawing out all of your shapes over and over, that's going to take more time. This is just more of a delicate process so that you make sure that you don't skip any spots and you don't move it while you're going. Now I am going to move my fingers around to try to keep my stencil as close to the paper as possible. It makes the tracing a lot easier. If I'm not doing this, then what happens is my paper will lift up and I'll make little pencil marks underneath my stencil. So take your time and just go all the way around and try your hardest to make sure you don't skip any spots. It just makes for more work later when you're trying to line it back up to get back in there. So once I go all the way around, I have my stencil on here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stencil, I'm going to slide it over, and this should interlock very nicely, just like so. And then we will repeat the process. While you're tracing, try to keep in mind to take your time. Every time you slide your piece over, it should lock in perfectly. Check to make sure that you have it lined up on all of the sides before you continue drawing. Now that I'm done tracing out my template, what I'm going to do is I need to decide what I'm going to turn this into. You can take your template and you can kind of turn it different ways to look at it, or you can even take your entire paper and kind of start turning it, rotating it, maybe start thinking of different things. Maybe I want to turn this into a stingray with a tail, something like that. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn mine into an elephant. So I'm just going to take this as my trunk, and maybe I put some little lines on my trunk. Maybe I give it the inside of the trunk a little bit. I want to give my elephant a couple of nice big eyes. I'm just going to use some little U's that are upside down. Maybe we'll throw on some nice little eyelashes. And then I want to separate out my ears. So I'm just going to draw some little lines that come down and maybe add some little curved lines just to make it look more like an ear. So maybe something like that. Or maybe I want those to go the other way. Curve this way. So now I have my design. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that design and then I'm going to repeat it over and over. Try to keep in mind while you are going in and filling in all of the new shapes you had to not skip any parts. I accidentally I skipped the inside of some of the eyes, or I especially neglected some of the ones around the very outside where you only have a little bit of the shape showing through. So take your time. Now that I'm done drawing out all of my designs for all the elephants that I made, the last step is just to add colors. So I'm going to be using colored pencils today because I generally like the way things look with colored pencil. You can definitely paint these. You can use markers. You can use crayons. This one would be a little hard with sidewalk chalk, but you feel free. If you do have pastels or oil pastels, you can definitely use those. You can do this with paints as well, either tempera, watercolor, acrylic. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. You want to try to make sure that your colors don't bleed, especially if you're doing watercolor paints. And now we'll go ahead and get started. When you're coloring, try to take your time. I definitely went too fast in a few spots and used the wrong color. Try to come up with creative things you can do. I changed like the eye color on all of my elephants just to be a little bit different. I did end up using both crayon and colored pencil. I used a gray crayon so I could get a different look to the elephant. Also, if you're having a hard time, take a break, come back to it later. And remember, you can even take your template and flip it around and make a different thing out of the exact same template. Have fun. I have a few examples. The first one is the one that I just created. So remember, this is a translation where we cut pieces out of the square, slid them down, and then taped them in place. And then we copied the exact same interlocking design, sliding it over one piece at a time, making sure that it all fits together. Some of the other examples I have, like this one from summer, is actually a rotation, which is why you can see these rabbits and eggs that are kind of going around in a circle. They're rotating. We have this one by Brianna, which is one of my favorite ones. I wish it was completed, but you can see the different fish, and then she's just changing the colors from one fish to the next so that they kind of, using complementary colors, really pop out. I also have this one from Ashley, and hers is like these little teddy bears. Again, this is a translation. They're just sliding one piece over to the next, and they all fit in perfectly. And the last one is from Jessica, which again I wish was finished, but I really like the idea of having the exact same thing over and over, but then changing the colors to make it different. So we are repeating the exact same thing, but you don't have to use the exact same colors on every one. Thank you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I can't wait to see what you guys create.